Behind the dazzling lights and perfect smiles of Hollywood's golden age, a darker story was playing out. Stars like Judy Garland and Marilyn Monroe were not human beings, but valuable commodities, managed, drugged, and emotionally annihilated by a system that valued profit over life. This is the truth the moguls tried to bury: the immense, tragic cost of manufactured celebrity, a price often paid in privacy, sanity, and life itself. Judy Garland, the little girl lost to the moguls born Frances Ethel Gum. Judy Garland was thrust onto the stage almost before she could walk. Her earliest years were defined by the pressure to perform, setting the stage for a lifetime of seeking approval. When Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, under the tyrannical Louis B. Mayer, signed the 13-year-old in 1935, they acquired a vulnerable commodity under a standard, restrictive 7-year contract, a document that essentially conferred ownership of her persona and labor to the studio. Mayer and the studio machine immediately deemed her appearance too ordinary, particularly when placed beside Lana Turner and Mickey Rooney. This destructive message led to a lifelong body image struggle to control her weight and sustain her grueling schedule of 20-hour workdays. Studio physicians, who were first and foremost employees of the studio, began administering a corrosive regimen of pills. They gave her stimulants, pep pills, amphetamines, to keep her awake, followed by sedatives, sleepers, barbiturates, to force her rest. This chemically enforced cycle fostered a dependency before she had even turned 16, effectively turning her into a high-performing addict for the studio's benefit. The financial reality of her labor was staggering. Though she generated millions, she often saw only a fraction of it, all while being controlled by Mayer's personal approval or disapproval. The triumph of The Wizard of Oz in 1939 solidified her stardom, yet it cemented her tragic fate, confining her to juvenile or girl-next-door roles, preventing her natural maturation as an artist. When the studio finally deemed her too old for teenage parts, they failed to provide the support required for her to establish herself as an adult actress, instead focusing their efforts on younger, newer assets. She was summarily let go from her contract in 1950, following a series of emotional breakdowns and missed workdays, events the studio coldly categorized as unprofessional conduct. Hollywood had taken its star, stripped her of her childhood, fostered a lifelong dependence, and then discarded her when she was too fragile to be profitable. Her attempts to break free, such as her Oscar-nominated comeback in A Star is Born, 1954, were remarkable acts of resilience, but were ultimately overshadowed by the deep psychological and chemical damage inflicted by the system. Garland's life remains the quintessential tragedy of a genius, talent utterly consumed by the machine that built it. The girl who sang Over the Rainbow was trapped in the darkest corner of Hollywood. Frances Farmer, The Battle Against the System. She was heralded as the next great dramatic actress, a blonde goddess with a socialist soul. But when she refused to conform to the studio's rigid image, Hollywood responded with a campaign that drove her into mental health institutions. Frances Farmer was a fiercely intellectual and nonconformist woman whose early dreams involved writing and political activism, not the glamour of the screen. Paramount Pictures signed her to a 7-year contract in 1935, intending to mold her into a marketable ingenue. The conflict began immediately, where Paramount demanded compliance, including mandatory wardrobe fittings, publicity interviews, and controlled social appearances. Frances demanded artistic integrity and intellectual freedom. Her unwillingness to play the social game, her preference for serious literature over superficial parties, and her outspoken political views were interpreted as difficult and uncooperative. The studio system was designed to crush individuality. A star's persona was too valuable to be left to the whims of the actual human being. The tensions worsened when she left Hollywood for serious theater in New York, a move seen as a professional and personal betrayal of her contractual obligations. Upon her return, she was offered subpar roles, a deliberate professional slowdown, known as suspension in contract terms, to punish her rebellion. As her career stalled and her personal life unraveled, the studio and the legal system used her emotional struggles and nonconformist lifestyle as a weapon. Following highly volatile public incidents, including an infamous arrest for a traffic violation where she was confrontational with police, she was declared legally incompetent and committed to a series of mental health facilities in 1944. For 10 long years, the industry that had courted her talent stood by silently, offering no financial or moral support. Her commitment, which involved brutal and controversial treatments, was a profound failure of the Hollywood system, which preferred to eliminate a difficult woman rather than support a complex artist. The narrative of her madness was a convenient cover for the system's inability to control her. She challenged the studio's right to own her persona and paid a steep price for that audacity. Clara Bow, the it girl who couldn't be tamed. She defined the roaring 20s with her captivating spirit. But for a girl born into extreme poverty and mental illness, the relentless scrutiny of silent film fame became a prison, forcing her retirement at age 26. Clara Bow's childhood was marked by destitution and emotional turmoil in the Brooklyn slums. When she won a film contest in 1921, the industry quickly seized upon her natural, uninhibited charm. The release of It in 1927 made her the definitive symbol of the Jazz Age, the original It Girl. Hollywood exploited this persona relentlessly. Her studio, Paramount, was eager to capitalize on her raw, sexual energy, but did little to protect her from the consequences of that public image. The studio's moral hypocrisy was glaring. They profited immensely from her racy image, but used her working-class background and casual relationships to fuel scandalous, destructive leaks to the press, allowing her private life to be perpetually scrutinized and judged. The transition to talkies intensified the pressure and the press scrutiny as the new sound technology exposed her Brooklyn accent, which was deemed too common for elite roles. Clara's working-class roots made her an easy target for elite Hollywood circles, while her fame invited increasingly aggressive and unfounded tabloid campaigns. The press, which had built her up, now tore her down. The studio, which should have protected its valuable asset, either ignored the personal attacks or, worse, encouraged the scandal to keep her name in the headlines. The constant pressure of maintaining the It Girl image, combined with her deep-seated fear of her mother's mental health struggles, took a severe toll. She felt like an object, endlessly scrutinized, leading to severe insomnia and anxiety. Clara Bow literally fled to a vast ranch in Nevada, seeking anonymity and abandoning a dazzling career at the age of 26. Her mental escape was a physical one from the commodity status Hollywood had imposed. Lupe Velez, the price of the Mexican Spitfire persona. She was a blazing talent, fierce and unforgettable, but the same fiery temperament the studios profited from was deemed too difficult for polite society, leading to professional isolation and a tragic, dramatic end. Born Maria Guadalupe Villalobos Velez, Lupe Velez burst onto the Hollywood scene in the late 1920s. Unlike the demure roles typically assigned to women, Lupe was a force of nature, earning the nickname the Mexican Spitfire. The studios initially celebrated her explosive energy. It was a unique and marketable commodity in a sea of blonde conformity. However, this celebrated fire was a double-edged sword, an acceptable act on screen, but a violation of the strict moral codes that governed the stars' private lives, enforced by the studios. The studios dictated that her on-screen fire must become off-screen docility. Off-screen, her tumultuous relationships and refusal to adhere to the strict moral codes of 1930s Hollywood were deemed unacceptable. Her personal life, especially her intense public marriage to and separation from actor Johnny Weissmuller, was constantly broadcast, often twisting her passion into instability. When her reputation for being difficult and unpredictable began to outweigh her box office draw, the studio's support quickly evaporated. She was typecast and relegated to the profitable but creatively restrictive Mexican Spitfire comedy series, which both capitalized on and mocked her persona. By the early 1940s, the roles slowed dramatically as studios preferred safer, more compliant stars. The final heartbreaking chapter unfolded in 1944. Pregnant out of wedlock and facing social judgment in a rigid society, Lupe Velez made a difficult decision that shocked Hollywood. She orchestrated her own elaborate farewell, but due to an unexpected physical ailment, she perished on her bathroom floor, failing to achieve the elegant tableau she had planned. The industry will bottle your unique energy for profit, but abandon you the moment that energy spills out in an unapproved way, resulting in a complete lack of support during her deepest personal crisis. Gene Tierney, beauty broken by mental strain. Arguably the most beautiful woman in Hollywood, a fragile mind was struggling against the pressures of fame, motherhood, and a series of personal tragedies. Gene Tierney's rise to stardom at 20th Century Fox was swift. She embodied the cool, sophisticated beauty of the 1940s, a look that was highly marketable in post-war cinema. However, her success was built upon a deep personal instability she struggled to hide, amplified by the rigid demands of the studio system, which valued outward perfection above all else. The true breaking point arrived with a devastating personal tragedy. In 1943, she contracted rubella from a fan during a public appearance, and her daughter, Daria, was born with severe developmental disabilities. This catastrophe plunged Gene into an agonizing period of guilt and profound despair. The tragedy was compounded by the industry's response. The studio continued to demand their leading lady remain available, glamorous, and emotionally stable for her lucrative film roles. The stress of maintaining this perfect facade while dealing with her daughter's specialized care and her own spiraling mental health needs proved too much. The constant pressure of film production, often 2 to 3 films a year, left no time for genuine recovery or therapy. Following a series of highly publicized breakdowns, including an incident where she wandered away from the set, Jean Tierney was admitted to a psychiatric facility in the mid-1950s, enduring harsh mental health treatments like electroshock therapy. The glamorous star was suddenly hidden away, a powerful symbol of how little support Hollywood offered its commodities when they were no longer functioning smoothly. Her return to acting was fragile, her career permanently altered by the industry's prioritization of production schedules over human wellness. Fatty Arbuckle, the scandal that ended innocence. He was one of the highest-paid comedians in the world. Then a single, devastating scandal, fueled by moral panic and a predatory press, erased him from history overnight. Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle was one of the most beloved and highest-earning figures in film, commanding an unprecedented salary of $1 million a year by 1920, a sum equivalent to over $15 million today. He symbolized the innocence and fun of early cinema. In 1921, during a party, a young actress named Virginia Rappi became severely ill and passed away days later. The press, driven by the sensationalist newspaper magnate William Randolph Hearst, twisted the story into a lurid tale of Hollywood depravity, using Arbuckle's portly physique to fuel the narrative of a monstrous assault. The lack of concrete evidence was ignored in favor of headlines that sold millions of papers, exploiting the public's appetite for celebrity moral decay. The newly formed Hays Office, the industry's self-censorship body, saw Arbuckle as a liability that threatened the entire industry's image. Paramount Pictures pulled all his films from distribution and effectively blacklisted him, despite having a substantial financial investment in his work. Arbuckle faced 3 lengthy trials. In the third trial, 6 months later, he was unanimously acquitted, with the jury issuing an unprecedented statement of apology, condemning the prosecution and the press. However, the exoneration came far too late. The damage to his reputation was irreversible. He attempted to restart his career quietly under the pseudonym William B. Good, but the shadow of scandal permanently eclipsed his brilliance. He passed away suddenly in 1933, a testament to how swiftly the industry will sacrifice a human asset to save its institutional reputation. Montgomery Clift, the face shattered by pressure. He was the definitive tortured, method-acting leading man. But when a horrific car crash damaged his iconic face, the studio and the press treated his recovery not as a miracle, but as a flaw to be hidden and exploited. Montgomery Clift arrived in Hollywood with an intense, vulnerable emotional core that redefined the male movie star, standing in stark contrast to the athletic, stoic heroes of the time. He grappled with profound insecurities and the need to conceal his private life in an unforgiving era that was openly hostile to nonconformity. His acting process, driven by deep emotional commitment, was personally taxing. On the evening of May 12, 1956, Clift was involved in a horrific car accident that shattered his jaw, cheekbones, and nose. The reaction from the industry was cold and pragmatic. They did not focus on his survival. They fixated on the aesthetic damage to the million-dollar face, which was literal insurance policy property. His psychological trauma and deep, persistent physical pain were seen not as medical issues, but as a liability. His studio, though outwardly supportive, offered no meaningful support structure. To cope with the persistent, agonizing physical pain and emotional agony, Clift turned increasingly to various substances and alcohol, a dependency that the studio system was known to facilitate with easy access to prescription drugs. The studio system, content to profit from his emotional intensity, offered no meaningful support structure. His struggles were swiftly labeled as the actions of a difficult and unstable star. For the last 10 years of his life, he was often referred to in the press with the cruel nickname, the Walking Wreck, a public dismissal of his ongoing suffering. His untimely passing in 1966 was a clear example of the industry consuming its most fragile talents through neglect and exploitation. Mae West, too bawdy for the changing times. She strutted onto the screen as a hurricane of innuendo, saving Paramount Pictures during the Depression. But as the Hays Code took hold, she was deemed too powerful, too frank, and ultimately too dangerous to be a star. Mae West arrived in Hollywood in 1932, entirely self-made and uncompromising. Her screen persona was a glorious contradiction, an unapologetic woman who used witty dialogue and suggestive humor to turn power structures on their head. Her early films were massive financial lifelines for Paramount, whose revenue she single-handedly boosted during the depths of the Great Depression. This financial power, however, gave her too much creative control in the eyes of the moralists. However, her unfiltered commentary and blatant sexuality made her a prime target for America's moral guardians. When the Production Code Administration, Hays Code, was granted full enforcement power in 1934, Mae West quickly became the most famous victim. She was considered the embodiment of everything the code sought to eliminate: sexually confident, independent, and anti-authoritarian. Censors descended upon her scripts, painstakingly removing or rewriting every suggestive line, effectively sanitizing her unique voice. The actress who had commanded total creative control found herself battling every single edit, a professional humiliation. The industry punished her defiance not just by censoring her art, but by actively working to diminish her star power. After filming My Little Chickadee in 1940, she found suitable work virtually impossible to secure because her very presence was now synonymous with censor trouble. Her exile was a slow, suffocating process of being systematically stripped of her artistic voice, a direct example of institutional control triumphing over market demand. Robert Walker, too sensitive for stardom. With a boyish charm and an unforgettable performance in Strangers on a Train, he seemed destined for lasting stardom. His tragic flaw was a sensitivity and instability that Hollywood's ruthless contract system could not or would not accommodate. Robert Walker suffered from deep-seated emotional vulnerabilities, ill-equipped to handle the harsh public nature of Golden Age Hollywood, particularly the constant invasion of privacy and the demands for emotional resilience. The defining crisis of his life was the dissolution of his marriage to Jennifer Jones, who left him for powerful producer David O. Selznick. The public and highly visible breakdown devastated Walker, who was suffering from profound mental illness. His emotional turmoil became an open, painful spectacle. The studio, MGM, was quick to label him unreliable and troublesome, rather than a man in need of genuine care. The concept of a mental health support system for a star simply did not exist. Only obedience and performance mattered. He began a cycle of seeking solace in various substances to manage his emotional pain, leading to frequent public incidents. His vulnerability was so pronounced that at various points Walker had to be admitted to psychiatric facilities. Crucially, the studio left him adrift, forcing him to continue working through personal crises, valuing his contractual obligation over his well-being. In 1951, he delivered his most brilliant performance in Alfred Hitchcock's Strangers on a Train. Tragically, just months later, while attempting to calm an emotional disturbance, a studio physician administered a prescribed sedative. Walker suffered a catastrophic reaction and passed away suddenly at the age of 32. His death highlighted the lethal combination of a vulnerable individual, a neglectful studio, and a compliant medical establishment. Rita Hayworth, the goddess who hated the sex symbol. She was the love goddess who made men swoon and defined wartime glamour. The tragedy was that the woman behind the image, Margarita Cancino, hated the invention, feeling like a puppet whose true self Hollywood had annihilated in the process of creating her star. Born Margarita Carmen Cancino in New York, Rita Hayworth was the daughter of a Spanish dancer and a Ziegfeld Follies girl. Her life was defined by performance from an early age, often dancing professionally alongside her father in traveling troupes, including shows in Mexico. When Hollywood came calling in the mid-1930s, the studios deemed the vibrant, dark-haired Margarita too ethnic for major leading roles. Her journey to stardom would become an exercise in painful self-erasure, proving that success was conditional upon abandoning her identity. The transformation was brutally meticulous, orchestrated primarily by Harry Cohn, the famously demanding head of Columbia Pictures. First, her name was changed from Margarita Cancino to the more Anglo-sounding Rita Hayworth. More drastically, she was forced to endure a lengthy, painful process of electrolysis to raise her natural dark hairline, creating the distinct, flowing auburn coiffure that would become instantly iconic. Finally, her natural black hair was dyed the vibrant shade of red that the public would come to recognize as her signature. By the time the transformation was complete, the original Margarita had vanished, replaced by the creation known as Rita Hayworth. The success of the new Rita was staggering, culminating in the 1946 film Gilda, where her famous, provocative glove striptease captured the imagination of the entire world. She was the ultimate fantasy figure, a symbol of allure and glamour that graced the nose cones of Allied bomber planes airplanes during the war. Yet behind the public adoration, the real woman felt a crushing sense of isolation. "Men went to bed with Gilda," she famously stated, "and woke up with me." She resented the fact that she was perpetually viewed as a beautiful, empty vessel, a physical symbol with no capacity for deep emotion or intellectual thought. Her repeated attempts to secure more serious, dramatic roles were frequently thwarted by Columbia, which preferred to keep its lucrative assets locked into the glamorous musical and drama roles that upheld her fantasy image. She tried to escape the industry by marrying Prince Ali Khan, briefly embracing European royalty, but even that failed to give her the normal life she craved. In her later years, the cumulative stress and a tragic, undiagnosed illness began to take a toll. Her emotional outbursts and professional difficulties, which were in fact early signs of Alzheimer's disease, were often cruelly misreported by the press as simple diva behavior or the result of alcohol dependency. Hollywood, which had profited from her image for decades, offered not compassion but condemnation. The true tragedy was that a debilitating neurological condition was framed as a moral failing. Rita Hayworth's story is the ultimate cautionary tale of a star who was destroyed by her own perfection. She was a woman who was physically and emotionally remade by the studios, only to be tossed aside when the internal machinery of that transformation finally began to break down. The idea of a strong personality being neutralized by the system will be explored again in the lives of writers like Dalton Trumbo, who faced political, not physical, erasure. The stories in this section, from Fatty Arbuckle's scandalous downfall to Rita Hayworth's heartbreaking struggle against her own manufactured image, show how quickly Hollywood's golden mask can slip. Which of these 5 tragic stories do you find the most unjust? And which star do you believe was treated the most unfairly by the studio system? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Dalton Trumbo, the pen that Hollywood couldn't silence. He was the most brilliant and highest paid screenwriter in the business, a master of dialogue and dramatic structure. Then the shadow of the Red Scare fell, and his refusal to bend a knee resulted in a decade of blacklisting and living under a pseudonym. Dalton Trumbo's talent was undeniable. Before the storm of political paranoia broke, he commanded immense respect and equally immense fees. Known for crafting taut, engaging stories with sharp social commentary, he represented the intellectual core of Hollywood, a community often dismissed as purely commercial. However, the rise of the Cold War ushered in an era of intense suspicion in America, and nowhere was this scrutiny more keenly felt than in the film industry, considered by some to be a hotbed of influence. The crisis arrived in 1947 with the commencement of the House Un-American Activities Committee, or HUAC, hearings. A list of writers, directors, and actors were called to testify about their political associations. Trumbo was one of 10 individuals who famously refused to cooperate with the committee, asserting that the questions violated their constitutional rights. This act of defiance was an extraordinary display of integrity in the face of immense pressure, yet it carried a devastating price. The immediate reaction from Hollywood's leadership was not support, but utter capitulation. Studio executives, fearful of boycotts and negative public opinion, met and quickly declared that the Hollywood 10, as they became known, would be immediately suspended without pay and eventually removed from their positions. Dalton Trumbo's career, at its peak, was terminated overnight by a decision rooted in fear and political expediency. He was barred from working under his own name, condemned to professional obscurity simply for holding unpopular political views. The next decade of Trumbo's life was a testament to his sheer resilience and genius. He was forced to move his family to Mexico for a time and began working in the shadows. He continued to write, utilizing a network of friends and fronts, men who would claim his scripts as their own, to sell his work to B-movie producers and secretly to major studios. It was a humiliating and financially precarious existence for a man who had once been a titan of the screen. Despite the secrecy, his talent could not be masked. Working entirely anonymously or under pseudonyms, he penned scripts that won significant recognition, including the story that became Roman Holiday and, most famously, The Brave One, which won an Academy Award for Best Motion Picture Story in 1957, an Oscar that went to his front. The blacklist finally began to crumble in the early 1960s, thanks to the courage of a few industry figures. Director Otto Preminger boldly announced that Trumbo would receive screen credit for the film Exodus. That same year, actor Kirk Douglas, who produced Spartacus, insisted that Trumbo's name appear on the screen. These acts of integrity signaled the end of Hollywood's decade of political cowardice. Dalton Trumbo's saga is a profound and unsettling reminder that Hollywood's betrayal can be motivated not just by scandal or personal failure, but by political fear. His pen, though silenced for a decade, ultimately proved mightier than the system that attempted to erase him. Trumbo was blacklisted for his politics. Barbara Payton was blacklisted for her love life. Her infamous love triangle led to a brutal fight and proved that for a beautiful star, a single wild night could destroy a career forever. We have now uncovered the tragic histories of Judy Garland, Montgomery Clift, and Dalton Trumbo, stars who were utterly consumed or exiled by the industry they served. To ensure you don't miss any of the powerful stories yet to come, from Rita Hayworth's heartbreaking struggle to the mystery of George Reeves's passing, please remember to subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell. Barbara Payton, The Fall, From Bombshell to Despair. A stunning blonde talent in the late 1940s, she promised to be the next biggest thing. But her wild public life was quickly abandoned by the studios once it turned scandalous and tragic. Barbara Payton secured a major contract with Universal International. Her rise was meteoric, a manufactured star designed to be the next bombshell. But her personal life soon became chaotic, fueled by an inability to manage the pressures of fame and the easy access to Hollywood's dark side. The major turning point occurred in 1951 when she became embroiled in a notorious love triangle involving actors Franchot Tone and Tom Neal, culminating in a brutal, highly publicized physical altercation. The ensuing media frenzy was relentless, a prime example of the press turning a personal crisis into public entertainment. The studios, under the moralistic grip of the production code, saw the scandal as a severe threat to their image. The actress, who had been on the verge of A-list stardom, was now radioactive. Studios canceled her contracts and refused to hire her, invoking moral clauses in her contract that were designed to control her behavior. Her swift descent was harrowing. Unable to manage the pressures, Payton spiraled into excessive consumption of alcohol and instability. The glamour evaporated, replaced by documented reports of homelessness and extreme poverty, a fate virtually unheard of for an actress who had been at the top only a few years earlier. She passed away in 1967 at the age of 39. The victim of a health issue brought on by years of hardship. Her story is a stark demonstration of how quickly the system discards a commodity the moment its public image is irrevocably tarnished. Vivian Vance, being a woman trapped as Ethel Mertz. For millions, she was the beloved, long-suffering landlady Ethel Mertz. But the triumph of I Love Lucy was a gilded cage for Vance, who was permanently typecast and deeply unhappy with the comparison to her co-star. Vivian Vance was a respected stage actress before being cast as Ethel Mertz in 1951, a role that brought unprecedented fame but created a professional prison. The role was a gilded trap. As I Love Lucy became a cultural phenomenon, the character of Ethel Mertz became inextricably linked with the public's perception of Vance. A stipulation within her contract reportedly required her to consistently appear heavier than her glamorous co-star, Lucille Ball, an instruction that served the show's comedic dynamic, but contributed to a lifelong struggle with body image and professional dissatisfaction. This contractual obligation to uphold an unflattering image for the benefit of the product is a classic example of star commodification. She understood that, to the public, she was forever Ethel, effectively ending her prospects for a serious dramatic career. Adding to the emotional toll was her notoriously difficult working relationship with William Frawley, who played Fred Mertz. The studio forced them to maintain a highly convincing on-screen marriage despite their private animosity, requiring them to constantly perform their characters even when the cameras weren't rolling. When the series concluded, Vance struggled to find roles that were not simply variations of Ethel Mertz. Hollywood had used her talent to create an enduring character, but had simultaneously foreclosed the possibility of any other creative exploration. Leaving the talented woman behind, the character professionally stalled. Dorothy Dandridge, the Black Star, who could only reach so far. She was a breathtaking pioneer, the first black actress nominated for a Best Actress Oscar. Yet, Hollywood's deep-seated prejudice ensured that there were simply no appropriate roles for a star of her magnitude. Dorothy Dandridge possessed a rare combination of vocal talent, acting ability, and ethereal beauty, achieving genuine crossover appeal that challenged the industry's racial barriers. Her moment of true glory arrived with the 1954 film Carmen Jones, which earned her an Academy Award nomination for Best Actress, a historic achievement. developed. However, Hollywood was not ready to adapt its rigid studio system to accommodate a black leading lady. Her status exposed the fundamental racist constraints of the system. The subsequent years were defined by frustration and professional starvation. She desperately sought complex roles, but the parts offered were demoralizing, typically maids, servants, or subservient characters. She was caught in an impossible bind, too famous and glamorous for the meager, stereotypical roles offered to black performers, yet systemic prejudice prevented her from being cast in universal, romantic parts reserved for her white counterparts. She struggled with financial ruin, exacerbated by a manipulative ex-manager and the responsibility of caring for her disabled daughter. Dorothy Dandridge passed away in 1965 at the age of 42. Hollywood used her image to briefly pat itself on the back for being progressive, but then denied her the actual opportunities needed to sustain a career, condemning her to an emotional and financial precipice. The systemic racism of the era proved a more insidious, permanent cage than any single contract. George Reeves, the man who couldn't shed the cape. He was the physical embodiment of hope and virtue for a generation. Of children, Superman. But once the television screen solidified his image, the movie industry permanently closed its doors, leaving him trapped in a brightly colored costume he desperately wanted to shed. George Reeves's career began with genuine promise in the theatrical film world. He was a capable and handsome actor who had secured a memorable, albeit minor, role as Stuart Tarleton in the 1939 epic Gone with the Wind. Throughout the 1940s, he worked steadily, appearing in various westerns and crime dramas, aiming for the kind of long, respected career enjoyed by many leading men of the era. He saw himself as a serious actor, not a comic book hero. That perception changed irrevocably in 1951 when he was cast in the television series Adventures of Superman. Television was still an emerging, often looked down on medium in Hollywood, considered the little brother to the grand cinema. For Reeves, it was initially a temporary gig, a way to earn money between major film projects. However, the show became an overnight phenomenon, turning him into the most recognizable figure on the American small screen. The immediate and profound consequence of this success was irreversible typecasting. To millions of children, George Reeves was Superman, a character whose physical image, the broad shoulders, the dark hair, the confident gaze, was burned into the collective consciousness. Unfortunately, for the film industry, this meant he was no longer a versatile actor, but a comic book commodity. When he auditioned for other film roles, directors and producers would look at him and reportedly say, "We can't have Superman in our picture." The role, which brought him fame, simultaneously ended his serious film career. His frustration grew as the years passed. He felt utterly trapped by the character, unable to pursue the complex, dramatic parts he aspired to. The television series paid a modest salary for the enormous cultural impact it had, and his financial standing was often precarious because he was unable to secure outside work. The constant vigilance required by his fame also meant he had to live up to the character's moral standards in public, never indulging in the casual anonymity enjoyed by less famous actors. By the mid-1950s, the series had ended, and Reeves, now in his mid-40s, faced a terrifying vacuum. He was too old to be a young leading man, and too identified with Superman to be anything else. He felt humiliated when his professional obligations sometimes required him to make public appearances, often wearing the cumbersome Superman suit for events that paid only small sums of money. The final, heartbreaking tragedy occurred in 1959. George Reeves was found to have passed away suddenly from a gunshot wound in his home. The official ruling was self-inflicted, but the circumstances of his passing were immediately shrouded in mystery and speculation, fueled by conflicting accounts and Hollywood rumors. Regardless of the official findings, the loss of George Reeves remains a profound illustration of a talent that was smothered by its own success. The industry that had reveled in his fame discarded him when he could no longer find a way out of the Cape. The mysterious circumstances of Reeves's final hours are sadly reminiscent of other unsettling Hollywood incidents, leading us to our next star, Thelma Todd, whose own passing remains one of the Golden Age's most enduring and chilling unsolved mysteries. The stories in this section, from the political blacklisting of Dalton Trumbo to George Reeves's agonizing professional entrapment, reveal the hidden cruelty beneath Hollywood's glamour. If you know someone who loves these classic films and wants to understand the true cost of stardom, please share this video with them to keep these important histories alive. Thelma Todd, Hollywood's unsolved mystery. Known for her effervescent comedy, her bizarre, unexplained passing in her own garage remains a chilling reminder that Hollywood's golden exterior often hid genuine menace. Thelma Todd embodied the carefree spirit of the pre-code era, A popular leading lady and known for her bubbly charm, she became a highly popular and marketable star, also opening a luxurious beachfront restaurant, Thelma Todd's Sidewalk Cafe, a financial venture designed to give her independence from the studio system. This establishment, however, drew unwanted attention from less savory elements. Todd was reportedly under intense pressure from powerful organized crime figures who wished to use her successful cafe as a front for their illegal gambling. She firmly rejected these persistent demands, an act of defiance that proved lethal. The mystery began in December of 1935. Todd was discovered 2 days later, passed away inside her garage, seated in her car, having perished from carbon monoxide poisoning. Authorities quickly ruled the event as a self-inflicted or accidental. However, many found the ruling suspicious. Why was the car door locked from the inside? Why were there signs of a struggle on her body? The suspicion immediately shifted towards the organized crime figures she had defied. The official closure of the case, despite the lingering questions, served as a grim demonstration of Hollywood's ability to quickly silence a difficult narrative and protect its powerful, interconnected interests from a full, potentially embarrassing investigation. The commodity was gone, and the system moved on. Russ Columbo, the crooner, whose candle burned too fast. He was the handsome, velvet-voiced crooner rivaling Bing Crosby, whose meteoric rise promised decades of stardom. His accidental passing in a freak shooting incident at age 26 cut short a career the studios were about to turn into legend. In the early 1930s, Russ Columbo possessed a sheer magnetism that made him a sensation, a perfect prototype of the romantic movie star. The studios and radio networks positioned Columbo as the chief rival to Bing Crosby, creating a dramatic, marketable rivalry. Columbo was on the verge of signing a major, multi-picture deal to solidify his transition to film, a contract that would have made him one of the highest-paid stars of the decade. The promise of that glittering future, however, was tragically extinguished in September of 1934. While examining antique firearms with a friend, a Civil War-era pistol malfunctioned and discharged, with the ricocheting bullet striking Columbo in the head. The event was a moment of shocking, unbelievable misfortune. The star, who was destined for international acclaim, perished instantly from a random freak accident. For the studios, the loss represented the evaporation of a massive financial asset, a sudden and total loss of investment. Columbo's life became a powerful what-if for Hollywood historians, a brutal reminder that sometimes the greatest enemy to a star's career is the unpredictable, random cruelty of fate, which does not respect studio contracts or financial projections. Marilyn Monroe, the commodity that suffocated the soul. The most famous woman in the world, Marilyn Monroe, was not a person, but a product, the ultimate bombshell created by the studio machine. The final tragedy was that the machine never figured out how to let the real Norma Jean Baker breathe. Born Norma Jean Mortensen, her childhood was marked by abandonment and instability, creating a deeply vulnerable woman desperate for validation. When she was groomed by 20th Century Fox, the Norma Jean of uncertain background was systematically erased, replaced by the platinum blonde creation known as Marilyn Monroe, a product that was meticulous, costly, and immensely profitable. The studio demanded that Marilyn remain the glamorous, comedic symbol, often casting her in roles that minimized her dramatic talent, fearing that any deviation would hurt the brand's profitability. Marilyn, however, was determined to be taken seriously as an actress, forming her own production company to fight for better material. The conflict between the serious artist and the reluctant icon resulted in immense professional difficulty, marked by chronic tardiness and emotional volatility, symptoms of her deep internal pain, which was exacerbated by the constant use of prescription drugs initially given to her by studio doctors. These struggles were framed by the press and studio executives as unprofessional and a temperamental diva to shift blame away from the toxic environment they created. She felt relentlessly scrutinized, consumed by the demands of a public that loved her image but cared little for the person inside. Her final film project, Something's Got to Give, was marked by escalating clashes, and she was released from her contract in a public and humiliating manner. Marilyn Monroe was found to have passed away suddenly in 1962 at the age of 36. Hollywood created a product too beautiful and too fragile, and then refused to let the woman underneath be anything else. Elizabeth Taylor, the child bride who grew up in headlines. She was one of the few stars to transition successfully from child actor to adult goddess. However, the emotional toll of having her entire adolescence and young adulthood managed, controlled, and exploited by MGM turned her into a vulnerable prisoner of public scrutiny. Elizabeth Taylor was delivered directly into the hands of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer at age 10, and her childhood was professionally managed by her parents and the studio. MGM controlled every aspect of her adolescence, viewing her as a vital piece of property. The studio manufactured the phenomenon of the MGM bride, orchestrating her early romances and first marriages for maximum publicity. Her first marriage to Conrad Hilton was essentially a grand publicity event, complete with a dress provided by the studio's wardrobe department. The immense pressure to always perform, even in her most personal moments, created a deep internal conflict between the performer and the private individual. As her marriages faltered, her emotional life became fodder for relentless tabloid headlines. The pinnacle of this public consumption arrived with her highly publicized affair with Richard Burton during the filming of Cleopatra, which was condemned globally. She became the world's most famous subject of gossip, condemned from pulpits. Elizabeth Taylor lived nearly her entire life in the public square, forced to endure every triumph and every heartbreak under the unblinking eye of the camera. The intense emotional burden of being a prisoner of fame from childhood onward was a devastating price for her success and an early example of media and studio collusion to weaponize a star's private life for profit. Veronica Lake, the hair, the haze, and the hard landing. Her peekaboo hairstyle became an instant global sensation and her signature. But Hollywood proved it only loved the hair, not the woman underneath. An actress whose struggles with alcohol dependency and a difficult personality led to a sudden, dramatic disappearance. Veronica Lake, with her famous peekaboo style, became an icon of the 1940s, a look so popular it had to be altered when it was discovered that women were injuring themselves while working factory jobs during the war because their hair was obscuring their vision. The paradox was that the very image that made her famous also became her cage, as the studio insisted on the style for virtually every role, fearing any change would devalue the brand. Behind the scenes, the star was struggling with an undiagnosed mental health condition. She had a reputation for being challenging on set, a trait the studios only tolerated when the box office was booming, and her growing dependence on alcohol to cope with the pressures led to her decline. By the mid-1940s, her professional stock began a rapid decline, fueled by bad press and her reputation for volatility. Paramount removed her from her contract in 1947, a sudden termination that shocked Hollywood. Within a few short years, the actress who had been one of the highest paid women in Hollywood had virtually vanished from the screen. She was publicly discovered working as a barmaid in a humble Manhattan hotel in the early 1960s, using a pseudonym. She struggled with poverty and emotional instability till her passing in 1973 due to kidney damage at the age of 53. The industry will exploit your unique image until the last ounce of profit is extracted, and then discard you with cold finality, with no safety net or concern for the human being you become. The stories of these 20 stars, from the blacklisting of Dalton Trumbo to the psychological disintegration of Marilyn Monroe and the mysterious fate of Thelma Todd, reveal a system that prioritized profit over people. Hollywood treated its most valuable assets not as human beings with needs, but as fragile, disposable commodities. If these stories opened your eyes to the hidden truths behind the dazzling facade of classic cinema, please take a moment to like this video. And if you want to continue exploring the hidden histories, untold scandals, and shocking secrets that define the world of entertainment, be sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next deep dive. Thank you for watching and for keeping these important histories alive.